My fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country.
He was born on May 29th, 1917, the year that President Woodrow Wilson began his second term. The war to end all wars continued. The United States entered the battle for democracy on Good Friday, April 6th. With America's entry into the World War, mothers and sweethearts knitted for the boys over there. Meatless, wheatless, fuel-less days were observed everywhere to conserve food and fuel for the armed forces. This was the turbulent background for the time a seed bore a blossom, the flower that bloomed into our country's destiny. He died November 22nd, 1963, a Black Friday. But what of the man's deeds? His was a life dedicated to the dignity of man, the principles of human rights, and the process of democracy which declares all men are created equal. And there is the key to the man, principle. John Fitzgerald Kennedy summed up his profiles in courage with these words, describing the greatness of men of courage and what the ingredients were that made their words and deeds immortal. President Kennedy wrote, "Each one's need to maintain his own respect for himself was more important to him than his popularity with others, because his desire to win or maintain a reputation for integrity and courage was stronger than his desire to maintain his office. Because his conscience, his personal standards of ethics, his integrity or morality, call it what you will, was stronger than the pressures of public disapproval, because his faith that his course was the best one and would ultimately be vindicated outweighed his fear of public reprisal." Now let's chronicle the life of President Kennedy. Happy days were here again, the fervor, the excitement of the Democratic nomination. July 1960. The Democrats nominated the youngest man to head a presidential ticket in the history of our nation, John Fitzgerald Kennedy for president, Lyndon Baines Johnson as his running mate. In his acceptance speech, President Kennedy said,
"We stand today on the edge of a new frontier, the frontier of the 1960s, the frontier of unknown opportunities and perils, the frontier of unfilled hopes and unfilled threats. Woodrow Wilson's New Freedom promised our nation a new political and economic framework. Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal promised security and succor to those in need. But the new frontier of which I speak is not a set of promises. It is a set of challenges. It sums up not what I intend to offer to the American people, but what I intend to ask of them. It appeals to our pride, not our security. It holds out the promise of more sacrifice instead of more security. The new frontier is here, whether we seek it or not. Beyond that frontier are uncharted areas of science and space, unsolved problems of peace and war, unconquered province of ignorance and prejudice, unanswered questions of poverty and surplus. It would be easier to shrink from that new frontier, to look to the safe mediocrity of the past, to be lulled by good intentions and high rhetoric, and those who prefer that course should not vote for me or the Democratic Party. But I believe that the times require imagination and courage and perseverance. I'm asking each of you to be pioneers towards that new frontier. My call is to the young in heart, regardless of age, to the stout in spirit, regardless of party, to all who respond to the scriptural call, be strong and of good courage, be not afraid, neither be dismayed. For courage, not complacency, is our need today. Leadership not salesmanship. And the only valid test of leadership is the ability to lead and lead vigorously.
Not since the happy warrior Alfred E. Smith ran as Democratic candidate against Herbert C. Hoover had a man's religious beliefs been so much at issue. Smith, a Catholic, lost to Hoover by better than 6 million votes. Kennedy refused to accept the seeming national inevitability that a Catholic could never be president of the United States. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, during his campaign, spoke out forthrightly his conviction many times.
I hope that no American, considering the really critical issues facing this country, will waste his franchise and throw away his vote by voting either for me or against me because of my religious affiliation. It is not relevant. I am saying to you that my decisions on every public policy will be my own as an American, as a Democrat, and as a free man.
John Fitzgerald Kennedy was ready for his Republican opponent, Vice President Richard M. Nixon. Because the communications media through television and radio reached all the people at once, the campaign went into high gear with the advent of the famous Nixon-Kennedy debates. There were 5 of them. These debates projected John Fitzgerald Kennedy as truly a man of vigor, whose intense sincerity and grasp of domestic and foreign policy issues, plus his fast wit and his innate quality of being a man of the people, gave the drive toward the White House a new dimension. In the first of these great debates, John Fitzgerald Kennedy had this to say.
The question before us all, that faces all Republicans and all Democrats, is, can freedom in the next generation conquer, or are the communists going to be successful? That's the great issue. And if we meet our responsibilities, I think freedom will conquer. If we fail to move ahead, if we fail to develop sufficient military and economic and social strength here in this country, then I think that the tide could begin to run against us. And I don't want historians 10 years from now to say, these were the years when the tide ran out for the United States. I want them to say, these were the years when the tide came in. These were the years when the United States started to move again. That's the question before the American people, and only you can decide what you want this country to be, what you want to do with the future. I think we're ready to move.
And so the stage was set for Election Day. The big question? What are Richard Nixon's chances? No vice president in over 100 years had gone into the White House by election, and there had been only one in our history, Martin Van Buren, who made it in 1836. And what about John Kennedy's chances? Only one man had gone from the Senate into the White House, Warren G. Harding, our 29th president, inaugurated in 1921, and a Republican to boot. There was a gloomy thought, but history bears it out. Since 1840, every president elected in a year ending in 0 has died in office. The election itself was so close that experts in political science, politicians, and we voters, the people, would be debating for a long time what the returns proved and what went wrong for Nixon and right for Kennedy. On January 20th, 1961, President-elect John Fitzgerald Kennedy took the oath of office as 35th President of the United States. Chief Justice of the United States Supreme Court, Earl Warren, administered the oath of office.
You, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear.
I, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, do solemnly swear.
That you will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
That I will faithfully execute the office of President of the United States.
And will, to the best of your ability.
And will, to the best of my ability.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
Preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution of the United States.
So help you God.
So help me God.
In his inaugural address, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, 35th President of the United States, shone as a dedicated statesman in a moment of truth, a mark in history to be remembered as John Fitzgerald Kennedy's finest hour. Here then, for posterity, is President John Fitzgerald Kennedy's inaugural address.
We observe today not a victory of party, but a celebration of freedom symbolizing an end as well as a beginning, signifying renewal as well as change. For I have sworn before you and Almighty God the same solemn oath our forebears prescribed nearly a century and 3/4 ago. The world is very different now, for man holds in his mortal hands the power to abolish all forms of human poverty and all forms of human life. And yet the same revolutionary beliefs for which our forebears fought are still at issue around the globe. The belief that the rights of man come not from the generosity of the state, but from the hand of God. We dare not forget today that we are the heirs of that first revolution. Let the word go forth from this time and place to friend and foe alike that the torch has been passed to a new generation of Americans born in this century, tempered by war, disciplined by a hard and bitter peace, proud of our ancient heritage, and unwilling to witness or permit the slow undoing of those human rights to which this nation has always been committed and to which we are committed today at home and around the world. Let every nation know, whether it wishes us well or ill, that we shall pay any price, bear any burden, meet any hardship, support any friend, oppose any foe to assure the survival and the success of liberty. This much we pledge and more. To those old allies whose cultural and spiritual origins we share, we pledge the loyalty of faithful friends. United, there is little we cannot do in a host of cooperative ventures. Divided, there is little we can do, for we dare not meet a powerful challenge at odds and split asunder. To those new states whom we welcome to the ranks of the free, we pledge our word that one form of colonial control shall not have passed away, merely to be replaced by a far more iron tyranny. We shall not always expect to find them supporting our view, but we shall always hope to find them strongly supporting their own freedom, and to remember that in the past, those who foolishly sought power by riding the back of the tiger ended up inside. To those people in the huts and villages of half the globe struggling to break the bonds of mass misery, we pledge our best efforts to help them help themselves for whatever period is required, not because the communists may be doing it, not because we seek their votes, but because it is right. If a free society cannot help the many who are poor, it cannot save the few who are rich. To our sister republics south of our border, we offer a special pledge to convert our good words into good deeds, in a new alliance for progress, to assist free men and free governments in casting off the chains of poverty. But this peaceful revolution of hope cannot become the prey of hostile powers. Let all our neighbors know that we shall join with them to oppose aggression or subversion anywhere in the Americas, and let every other power know that this hemisphere intends to remain the master of its own house. To that World Assembly of Sovereign States, the United Nations, our last best hope, in an age where the instruments of war have far outpaced the instruments of peace, we renew our pledge of support to prevent it from becoming merely a forum for invective, to strengthen its shield of the new and the weak, and to enlarge the area in which its writ may run. Finally, to those nations who would make themselves our adversary, we offer not a pledge, but a request that both sides begin anew the quest for peace. Before the dark powers of destruction, unleashed by science, engulf all humanity in planned or accidental self-destruction, we dare not tempt them with weakness, for only when our arms are sufficient beyond doubt can we be certain beyond doubt that they will never be employed. But neither can two great and powerful groups of nations take comfort from our present course, both sides overburdened by the cost of modern weapons, both rightly alarmed by the steady spread of the deadly atom, yet both racing to alter that uncertain balance of terror that stays the hand of mankind's final war. So let us begin anew, remembering on both sides that civility is not a sign of weakness, and sincerity is always subject to proof. Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate. Let both sides explore what problems unite us, instead of belaboring those problems which divide us. Let both sides, for the first time, formulate serious and precise proposals for the inspection and control of arms, and bring the absolute power to destroy other nations under the absolute control of all nations. Let both sides seek to invoke the wonders of science instead of its terrors. Together, let us explore the stars, conquer the deserts, eradicate disease, tap the ocean depth, and encourage the arts and commerce. Let both sides unite to heed in all corners of the earth the command of Isaiah to undo the heavy burdens and let the oppressed go free. And if a beachhead of cooperation may push back the jungle of suspicion, let both sides join in creating a new endeavor, not a new balance of power, but a new world of law, where the strong are just and the weak secure and the peace preserved. All this will not be finished in the first 100 days, nor will it be finished in the first 1,000 days, nor in the life of this administration, nor even perhaps in our lifetime on this planet. But let us begin. In your hands, my fellow citizens, more than mine, will rest the final success or failure of our course. Since this country was founded, each generation of Americans has been summoned to give testimony to its national loyalty. The graves of young Americans who answered the call to service surround the globe. Now the trumpet summons us again, not as a call to bear arms, though arms we need, not as a call to battle, though in battle we are, but a call to bear the burden of a long twilight struggle, year in and year out, rejoicing in hope, patient in tribulation, a struggle against the common enemies of man, tyranny, poverty, disease, and war itself. Can we forge against these enemies a grand and global alliance, north and south, east and west, that can assure a more fruitful life for all mankind? Will you join in that historic effort? In the long history of the world, only a few generations have been granted the role of defending freedom in its hour of maximum danger. I do not shrink from this responsibility. I welcome it. I do not believe that any of us would exchange places with any other people or any other generation. The energy, the faith, the devotion which we bring to this endeavor will light our country and all who serve it. And the glow from that fire can truly light the world. And so, my fellow Americans, ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country. My fellow citizens of the world, ask not what America will do for you, but what together we can do for the freedom of man. Finally, whether you are citizens of America or citizens of the world, ask of us here the same high standards of strength and sacrifice which we ask of you. With a good conscience, our only sure reward, with history the final judge of our deeds, let us go forth to lead the land we love, asking his blessing and his help, but knowing that here on earth, God's work must truly be our own.
No one could fail to be impressed by the deadly seriousness with which John Kennedy took on the awesome responsibilities as President of the United States. His plea to the American people to back him in the struggle against the common enemies of mankind: tyranny, poverty, disease, and war. There were low points as well as high. The Bay of Pigs fiasco and the question of lack of air support for the Cuban invasion. And then a high point, an echo of the presidential inaugural address when he said,
"Let us never negotiate out of fear, but let us never fear to negotiate."
The Berlin Crisis, that summer, 1961, and our president addressed a tense nation.
We face a challenge in Berlin, but there is also a challenge in Southeast Asia, where the borders are less guarded, the enemy harder to find, and the dangers of communism less apparent to those who have so little. I hear it said that West Berlin is militarily untenable, and so was Bastogne, and so in fact was Stalingrad. Any dangerous spot is tenable if men, brave men, will make it so. We seek peace, but we shall not surrender. 3 times in my lifetime, our country and Europe have been involved in major wars. In each case, serious misjudgments were made on both sides of the intentions of others, which brought about great devastation. Now, in the thermonuclear age, any misjudgment on either side about the intentions of the other could rain more devastation in several hours
than has been wrought in all the wars of human history. I know that sometimes we get impatient. We wish for some immediate action that would end our perils. But I must tell you that there is no quick and easy solution. The communists control over 1 billion people, and they recognize that if we should falter, their success would be imminent. We must look to long days ahead, which, if we are courageous and persevering, can bring us what we all desire. In meeting my responsibilities in these coming months as president, I need your goodwill and your support, and above all, your prayers.
Not all of his domestic problems originated at home. In the first few months of his administration, the Soviet Union took a great leap forward in space, sending a man around the world to safe recovery. The president faced the race for space with determination and the backing of an eager nation. The fruit of this effort was realized on February 20th, 1962, when John H. Glenn, Jr. became the first American astronaut to orbit the Earth. The president flew in from West Palm Beach to Cape Canaveral, Florida, to present the NASA Medal for Distinguished Service to Colonel Glenn.
17 years ago today, a group of Marines put the American flag on Mount Suribachi. So it's very appropriate that today we decorate Colonel Glenn of the United States Marine Corps, and also realize that in the not-too-distant future, a Marine or a naval man or an Air Force man will put the American flag on the moon. I present this citation. The President of the United States takes pleasure in awarding the National Aeronautic and Space Administration Distinguished Service Medal to Lieutenant Colonel John H. Glenn, Jr., United States Marine Corps. The services set forth in the following: in a duty of great responsibility as the first American astronaut to perform orbital flight. Lieutenant Colonel Glenn's orbital flight, February 20th, 1962, made an outstanding contribution to the advancement of human knowledge, of space technology, and in demonstration of man's capability in space flight. His performance was marked by his great professional skill, his skill as a test pilot, his unflinching courage, and his extraordinary ability to perform most difficult tasks under conditions of great physical stress and personal danger. His performance in fulfillment of this most dangerous assignment reflects the highest credit upon himself and the United States. Colonel, we appreciate it.
If the debacle of the Bay of Pigs invasion marked a low point in the Kennedy administration, the Cuban Crisis of October 1962 was perhaps his finest show of strength and determination. It was on October 22nd, after a week of rumor and tension, that President Kennedy revealed to the nation and the free world the presence of missiles and launching sites on the island of Cuba.
Good evening, my fellow citizens. This government, as promised, has maintained the closest surveillance of the Soviet military buildup on the island of Cuba. Within the past week, unmistakable evidence has established the fact that a series of offensive missile sites is now in preparation on that imprisoned island. The purpose of these bases can be none other than to provide a nuclear strike capability against the Western Hemisphere. Upon receiving the first preliminary hard information of this nature, last Tuesday morning at 9 a.m., I directed that our surveillance be stepped up. And having now confirmed and completed our evaluation of the evidence and our decision on a course of action, this government feels obliged to report this new crisis to you. Nuclear weapons are so destructive and ballistic missiles are so swift that any substantially increased possibility of their use or any sudden change in their deployment may well be regarded as a definite threat to peace. For many years, both the Soviet Union and the United States, recognizing this fact, have deployed strategic nuclear weapons with great care, never upsetting the precarious status quo, which ensured that these weapons would not be used in the absence of some vital challenge. Our own strategic missiles have never been transferred to the territory of any other nation under a cloak of secrecy and deception. And our history, unlike that of the Soviets since the end of World War II, demonstrates that we have no desire to dominate or conquer any other nation in violation of Soviet assurances and in defiance of American and hemispheric policy. This sudden, clandestine decision to station strategic weapons for the first time outside of Soviet soil is a deliberately provocative and unjustified change in the status quo, which cannot be accepted by this country if our courage and our commitments are ever to be trusted again by either friend or foe. But now further action is required, and it is underway, and these actions may only be the beginning. We will not prematurely or unnecessarily risk the course of worldwide nuclear war, in which even the fruits of victory would be ashes in our mouth. But neither will we shrink from that risk at any time it must be faced. Acting, therefore, in the defense of our own security and of the entire Western Hemisphere, and under the authority entrusted to me by the Constitution, as endorsed by the resolution of the Congress, I have directed that the following initial steps be taken immediately. First, to halt this offensive buildup, a strict quarantine on all offensive military equipment under shipment to Cuba is being initiated. All ships of any kind bound for Cuba, from whatever nation or port, where they're found to contain cargoes of offensive weapons, be turned back. This quarantine will be extended, if needed, to other types of cargo and carriers. We are not at this time, however, denying the necessities of life, as the Soviets attempted to do in their Berlin blockade of 1948. Second, I have directed the continued and increased close surveillance of Cuba and its military buildup. The foreign ministers of the OAS, in their communique of October 6, rejected secrecy on such matters in this hemisphere. Should these offensive military preparations continue, thus increasing the threat to the hemisphere, further action will be justified. I have directed the armed forces to prepare for any eventualities, and I trust that in the interest of both the Cuban people and the Soviet technicians at the sites, the hazards to all concerned of continuing this threat will be recognized. Third, it shall be the policy of this nation to regard any nuclear missile launched from Cuba against any nation in the Western Hemisphere as an attack by the Soviet Union on the United States, requiring a full retaliatory response upon the Soviet Union. Fourth, as a necessary military precaution, I have reinforced our base at Guantanamo, evacuated today the dependents of our personnel there, and ordered additional military units to be on a standby alert basis. Fifth, we are calling tonight for an immediate meeting of the Organization of Consultation under the Organization of American States to consider this threat to hemispheric security and to invoke Articles 6 and 8 of the Rio Treaty in support of all necessary action. The United Nations Charter allows for regional security arrangements, and the nations of this hemisphere decided long ago against the military presence of outside powers. Our other allies around the world have also been alerted. Sixth, under the Charter of the United Nations, we are asking tonight that an emergency meeting of the Security Council be convoked without delay to take action against this latest Soviet threat to world peace. Our resolution will call for the prompt dismantling and withdrawal of all offensive weapons in Cuba under the supervision of UN observers before the quarantine can be lifted. Seventh and finally, I call upon Chairman Khrushchev to halt and eliminate this clandestine, reckless, and provocative threat to world peace and to stable relations between our two nations. I call upon him further to abandon this course of world domination and to join in an historic effort to end the perilous arms race and to transform the history of man. He has an opportunity now to move the world back from the abyss of destruction by returning to his government's own words
that it had no need to station missiles outside its own territory, and withdrawing these weapons from Cuba, by refraining from any action which will widen or deepen the present crisis, and then by participating in a surge of peaceful and permanent solutions.
And so John Kennedy proved to the world that he and our nation would not shrink from our responsibility to freedom. Nor would he shrink from his responsibility to all citizens of these United States, regardless of color or creed. President Kennedy liked to quote the great emancipator, Abraham Lincoln. One of his favorite Lincoln quotes, "The dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. The occasion is piled high with difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. As our case is new, so we must think anew and act anew. We must disenthrall ourselves." President Kennedy's approach to civil rights was simple, based on the conviction that all men are created equal. Here are excerpts from his all-important civil rights address to the nation.
The heart of the question is whether all Americans are to be afforded equal rights and equal opportunities, whether we are going to treat our fellow Americans as we want to be treated. If an American, because his skin is dark, cannot eat lunch in a restaurant open to the public, if he cannot send his children to the best public school available, if he cannot vote for the public officials who represent him, if, in short, he cannot enjoy the full and free life which all of us want, then who among us would be content to have the color of his skin changed and stand in his place? Who among us would then be content with the counsels of patience and delay? 100 years of delay have passed since President Lincoln freed the slaves, yet their heirs, their grandsons, are not fully free. They are not yet freed from the bonds of injustice. They are not yet freed from social and economic oppression. And this nation, for all its hopes and all its boasts, will not be fully free until all its citizens are free.
And thus we have heard a part of the legacy of the 1,000 days. John Fitzgerald Kennedy declared that his task would only be begun in his first 1,000 days in office. And he lived little beyond that. Friday, the 22nd. A day like any other day, things to do, work to be done. People going on their merry way could not conceive the gloom to come. All that is except for one, with a vindictive and evil mind, whose cruel plan already begun. An honorable target he aimed to find. And then throughout the entire world, the startling news flash came. An assassin's bullet had just been hurled into this man of renown, so proud of Maine. But they said the name entirely wrong. Our president, it couldn't be. For he was driving amid a throng of people who loved him, like you and me. But the horrid news kept coming, that in that Dallas town, a maniac had gone gunning and shot our president down. And then the newsman sadly said the words we couldn't believe. John Fitzgerald Kennedy is dead, and now the world will grieve. Yes, November 22nd, 1963, a fate no one had reckoned, and still say, it cannot be, that in a country under God, America brave and free, conspiracy and hatred trod upon our democracy. But it's not too late to turn to him, in whose hand still lies our fate. Together may we work and strive toward world peace we hope to gain. That although we now know he's not alive, may he not have lived and died in vain.
Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country.